Senator Marshall.
Thank you, Ranking Member. Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Schultz, I'm going to change the subject a little bit. Last year, your company decided to close 16 stores across the nation, including the Starbucks down the street here at Union Station, due to rising crime in these cities. Shortly thereafter, you stated that there are going to be many more closures for similar concerns. Your store managers are quoted saying that their employees have not felt safe amid a spike in crime, a surge of assaults, thefts, and drug use. I agree, in fact. In fact, I fear for my own staff walking home in this neighborhood. I feared so much that I purchased each one of them one of these noisemakers this past Christmas. One of our colleagues' office staff was recently violently assaulted as well. The lawlessness in this country is out of control. When you decided to close those 16 stores because you feared for your employees' safety, did you then, and do you still believe that the White House needs to focus on restoring law and order and relaying a message to this country of respect for the brave men and women in law enforcement in this country?
Thank you, Senator. We do, in fact, have a significant issue of safety in urban cities around America. And Starbucks has closed many, many stores that were profitable as a result of the fact that our own people do not feel safe working in the stores. And we have a situation of homelessness, drugs, mental illness, and as a result of that, many of the societal issues that we're facing today are difficult for Starbucks to address because we don't have the power or the responsibility to address these things as you've described.
Thank you for the for your answer and your honesty. It's a sad day for this nation when the crime is so bad that you feel the need to close profitable shops because you can't keep your employees safe at their place of work. And I have to note for the record that every single location you closed, all 16 of them, were in Democrat-ran cities. We have another saying. I want to change the subject here again. We have a saying back home that pigs get fat and hogs get slaughtered. You do have 645 unfair labor cases brought against you. Based upon the size of the crowd, there may be some smoke and fire together there. This is your chance. Tell me your side of the story. Tell me why you have so many complaints. Do you feel like that there's been a fair negotiation process? Have you and your company been open to a negotiation process? So this is, give you a minute here, a minute and a half, just to tell me your side of the story.
Thank you. First off, with regard to the NLRB, Senator Cassidy mentioned a number of issues. Starbucks Coffee Company will abide by the law and follow the process. I hope the committee does investigate many of the things that are going on within the NLRB and the courage of the whistleblower to come forward with regard to the allegations that she has, that she wants to discuss with the committee. This process, unfortunately, has played out publicly in many different ways. And unfortunately, a public company in America today is unfortunately guilty before before anything.
So this is your chance.
Yeah.
So why are you innocent?
Yeah, we're innocent because we've done everything that we possibly can to respect the right under the law of our partner's ability to join a union. But conversely, we have consistently laid out our preference without breaking any law of communicating to our people about what we believe is a vision for the company. And when I went to Buffalo, even though it was cited before by Senator Casey, I never mentioned the word union once. I talked about the vision for Starbucks. And the reason is, post-COVID, 95% of the people wearing the green apron had worked for the company less than a year. They didn't know anything about Starbucks. So I went to Buffalo to share the story of Starbucks, what we have done as a company, equity in the form of stock options, comprehensive health insurance, all the things that we've done to provide opportunity for our people. I didn't go there to talk about the union. I went there to lay out our vision for the company. And I consistently have done that, as well as the leaders of Starbucks. We have not broken the law. We have simply tried to defend ourselves and tell our employees, all of them, what we stand for, our future, the aspirations we have, the growth of the company, and the opportunity. Starbucks is, in many ways, the quintessential entrepreneurial company of the last 30 years. We've created 5 million jobs from a cup of coffee, and we've shared the profits with our people. And we've done all these things not because of the union, but because of the compassion, the empathy, and in many ways, my own story of understanding what happened to my father and trying to build the kind of company that my father never got a chance to work for. And that is the story of Starbucks.
With last night's border crossing numbers, you've broken another record, hitting well over 5 million illegal border crossings under your watch. And the American people believe that this administration still has no plan to address the issue. The safety and security of families is the number one concern I hear from my parents, from my family, from people up here in the Senate. You've made every community a border community. And the increase in fentanyl deaths and skyrocketing crime proves that. 300 people dying every day in America from fentanyl poisoning, a plane crashing every night. I'm concerned that we have no idea who's coming into our country. Since the beginning of the fiscal year 23, Border Patrol has encountered 70 illegal aliens who are listed in the terrorist screening database. In fiscal year 22, 98 illegal aliens on the terrorist watch list were encountered at the southern border. Do you know how many terrorists, including this database, have crossed our southern border and are currently residing in our country?
Senator, let me assure you that the safety and security of the American people is the highest priority of the Department of Homeland Security and my highest.
And there's a big
priority.
difference between priority and accomplishments and doing what you're supposed to do. So can you answer my questions about the terrorists that have crossed the southern border that are still in this country?
Let me assure you, Senator, first of all, we work tirelessly.
I understand that. You are going to answer the question? I work tirelessly, you work tirelessly, Americans work tirelessly, but our country is under attack and we're not safe. Do you have any idea how many terrorists have crossed the southern border that are still in our country? I assume that you don't. Let's go to the next question. Under your leadership, this administration deported fewer illegal aliens than any other in modern American history. However, your budget reveals there are over 5 million aliens on the non-detained docket for deportation. 5 million. Of those 5 million, there are 400,000 convicted criminal aliens residing in this country. Let me say that number again, 400,000 convicted criminal aliens residing in this country. Your budget requests only enough money to remove 7% of those people. How do you justify allowing nearly 500,000 convicted criminal aliens to remain in this country, in our American communities? And how does that keep American citizens safe to permit known criminals to remain in the country?
Senator, a number of things, if I may.
I'd rather have the short answer on this question.
I'm going to give you
Lock in on this question if you can, please.
I'm going to give you a short answer, and it has multiple parts because there are multiple responses. Number one, you are not accounting for the $4.7 billion contingency fund that we propose for fiscal year 2024. Number two, this administration has removed more aggravated felons per month than the prior administration. Number three, when you cite the removal numbers, you're excluding the fact that we are obligated to enforce Title 42 of the United States Code, the Public Health Authority.
Of those 400,000 convicted criminal aliens, how many do you plan on removing?
We are going to focus our efforts on the safety and security of the people and remove any individual that presents a public safety threat to the fullest extent that our resources permit.
Do you feel like leaving any of those 400,000 terrorists inside our country makes us more safe or less safe?
Senator, I'm not, first of all, you have a inaccurate factual premise to your question.
You're saying there's not 400,000 convicted criminal aliens remaining in the United States?
And we are focused on enforcing the law in the service of the American people. We will
Then do your job. Listen, my next question. According to documents released under the Freedom of Information Act, you have used your private email for official business. How often do you use private email for official business, and how are you following the DHS policy on the use of non-DHS email accounts for official business?
Mr. Secretary, I think there's some hearing issues. If you could speak a little bit more into the microphone, it would be helpful to our folks here.
Is that helpful? Your assertion is false, Senator.
Okay.
And let me share something with you, because you mentioned something about your parents, and I'm gonna have a point of personal privilege.
Then I'll want my time back. If we're getting a lecture from the secretary, then I want you to answer my questions, not give me lectures. So you're not using your personal email for official business. You deny that.
Senator, if somebody errantly sends me an email on my personal email that should have been sent to my work email, I forward it to my work email. That's what I do. I fulfill my responsibilities scrupulously, and I have 100% confidence in the integrity of my actions.
I appreciate the answer. Thank you. I appreciate your answer. I want one more point I'd like to make here. The Secure Fence Act mandated that the Secretary of DHS, that would be you, achieve operational control of our borders. Mr. Secretary, our borders are not under control. Mr. Secretary, you are derelict in your duties. I would be derelict to not do something about this. And that's why I have a draft resolution here that I intend to introduce in the coming days that would require the Senate to take a vote of no confidence on Secretary Mayorkas. As I've stated on the record before, I stand at the ready to receive articles of impeachment from the House and conduct an impeachment trial in this body. But in the meantime, I think the Senate must show our colleagues in the House that we've had enough of the failures from the Department of Homeland Security and believe that the Secretary is not fit to faithfully carry out the duties of his office. I would like to insert this into the record. Mr. Chairman, thank you, and I yield back. Thank you for being here. Ms. Sue, as has been alluded to here, that nationally we had a significant problem with the unemployment insurance benefits. But what I want to talk about is the statute of limitations. So we approached $200 billion of improperly paid unemployment insurance benefits, and many of those statutes of limitations on these cases will be expiring in 2025. We have legislation that would extend the statute of limitation on fraud for another 5 years that would be consistent for the statute of limitations for PPP and COVID idle fraud. How do you feel about extending the statute of limitations on those cases?
Thank you very much, Senator. I know I've said this already, but I feel like it bears repeating that the fraud, waste, and abuse in the system was unacceptable. It's intolerable. That's why I took the steps I took, and that's why at the Department of Labor, I have been so focused on making sure that we are creating an unemployment insurance system in conjunction with states that is going to stop fraud at the front door, deliver benefits to eligible individuals, be the safety net it's intended to be for workers who are out of a job through no fault of their own, and to be good stewards of taxpayer money. As I've also said a few times today, but not about this particular issue, so I appreciate your question, I have full deference to the authority of this body and of the decisions that Congress makes about the right policies in this case and in others. And if that is something that, that Congress were to pass and entrust the Department of Labor to enforce, then if confirmed as Labor Secretary,
But you agree there's a lot of
so.
money still out there, and these cases are still ongoing, and we could gain back some of those monies if we continued those investigations?
You know, Senator, that is a very good question. I don't know. I don't believe that there are new fraudulent payments going out every day in the same way that we've talked about. I mean, obviously, the pandemic unemployment assistance program
so I'm talking
ended.
about cases that are already should have been open that are not been closed yet. So extending the statute of limitations would allow us to keep going after the old ones.
Yeah, I will say, Senator, one thing is that at the Department of Labor, our Office of Inspector General has also been doing work to investigate cases, to try to recover monies where possible. And I do think that is an important part of the fight against fraud.
I want to turn and talk about the rules on joint employer definitions that have gone through significant changes in the past decade. Previous administration's rule provided a clear-cut, defined, and accurate definition of a joint employer. And again, you may have answered this question already. We're bouncing between committees. Under your leadership, this rule was rescinded and has not been replicated with anything. This has caused quite a bit of uncertainty for businesses. And to that end, would you agree that an employer should be considered a joint employer only if directly, actually, and immediately exercises significant control over the primary elements of employment?
Senator, thank you so much for that question. The joint employer rule that was put in place by the prior administration was actually vacated by a federal judge, meaning a federal judge said that that rule could not stand. As a result, the Department of Labor rescinded it. What that did was restore the state of the law to the place it was before that rule came into place, which was based on decades of federal cases interpreting who a joint employer is and under what circumstances it would apply.
Do you agree with what I defined a joint employer was a second ago? I'm going to go through that again. Would you agree that an employer should be considered a joint employer only if it directly, actually, immediately exercises significant control over the primary elements of employment?
Thank you for that question, Senator. The joint employer test, I know you know this, is a fact-specific test. It's a test that's based on the relationship between, two or more
So
possible
I
employers.
defined it one way. Would you agree with the way I defined it? I think it's a yes or no question.
Senator, I'm not familiar enough with the case law to say that summary of it is an accurate statement of it. But I think to the point.
Then lastly, if
Okay.
you, and I understand that, business has been waiting over a year for an answer from the Department of Labor. Do you think that they deserve an answer sooner so they can make plans? There's nothing worse for a small business, for any business, than uncertainty.
I 100% agree with that. I think the regulatory certainty is very, very important. I know that from my family's history of having a small business, as well as my extended family's current status as business owners. The joint employer test, as it stands, is based on case law that has been developed over several decades. The Department of Labor does not have in its current agenda a plan to issue another rule about that.
Okay, thank you. I yield back.
Marshall.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's not a single person on our side of the aisle that wants the country to default on its debt. I want the American public to know that. There's not one of us that wants to default on our debt. But we also want to see responsible spending, and we know we cannot give the White House another credit card. Look, we can walk and chew gums. We can solve both problems. Why does it have to be either or? Why does this Capitol Hill live working in silos? I'll never understand it. What we can't do is push this problem onto my grandchildren and cripple their generation with burdensome debt and interest payments. And for the life of me, I don't understand why my colleagues across the aisle want to destroy future generations, all so that they can function as climate demigods. Let me tell you what I'm talking about. Jupiter is the Roman god of climate and weather. Indra was the Hindu god. Horus, the Egyptian god of climate and weather. Zeus, the Greek mythology god. I ask you, who's America's climate god? Is it John Kerry? Is it Al Gore? Why do we have this religious experience with climate rather than using common sense, talking about affordability, reliability, and all the while America's carbon footprint is going down? Today's White House and the Democrat Party have become the European Green Socialist Party. That's who they are today. They worship climate. And even the bank's meltdowns have been impacted by their worship of climate. Even our own Federal Reserve is upside down now, ignoring the same interest rate risk problems that Silicon Valley Bank ignored. all impacted by their climate worship. I just can't tell you enough how much I'm disappointed by the name of this hearing, the Default on America Act, blackmail, brinkmanship, and billionaire backroom deals. I don't know if I could come up with a more misleading and unjust title for a hearing. Again, there's not a single person on this side of the aisle that wants us to default on our debt. There's been no backroom deals, no brinkmanship. There's been no blackmail involved in this bill sent to us from our colleagues in the House. I believe the House GOP bill is a good solution. And let me be absolutely clear, there's no cuts to the VA or veterans benefits in the House Republican proposal, despite the lies coming from the left to the contrary. Democrats' fear-mongering and scare tactics using our veterans as political pawns are beneath the office we've been elected to serve. And of course, Republicans are going to keep fighting to protect and save Medicare and Social Security from White House policies that cut funding to those programs and dilute the resources. The irony is that is your side of the aisle that truly knows a thing or two about backroom deals. You got a marvelous warm-up with the American Rescue Plan and truly refined the art with the also misnamed Inflation Reduction Act. What a joke. While drafting the IRA in secret, behind closed door, there were no hearings. No bills, no debate, and no discussion. 1 minute there was no bill. The next we're voting on a sprawling wish list of the EU socialist Green Party agenda items, like saddling small oil and gas producers in Kansas with devastating methane fees that won't have any impact on the environment. I'd love to have a real debate about methane in this room, in this hearing. I'm here to tell you what won't work. I care too much about my children and my grandchildren and my parents and hardworking Americans already suffering by 15% overall inflation since Democrats took control of government policy. The American people and the national media know that the ball is in Joe Biden's court. Speaker McCarthy and the House GOP have put a deal on the table that claws back reckless government spending and hopefully will slow inflation while taking care of the debt ceiling for a year. That's a win-win opportunity. A deal's on the table. These are good things that the American people want and deserve. Our country cannot keep up racking up debt on the backs of hardworking Americans. We must face this head on. And all we're asking is that the Democrats stop all the political theatrics long enough to participate in a good faith negotiations so we can pay America's bills. We can do both. If anybody's listening today, I want to remind them, when it comes to addressing America's debt crisis, Republicans have done something and put forth a solution. Democrats have not. Mr. Riedel, what would your advice be to the president right now?
My advice to the president is to sit down and negotiate. The American people at least want to have a discussion, and he should sit down and negotiate with an open mind towards raising the debt limit and reducing a deficit that both sides can.
And the deal on the table does both of those. The deal that the Republicans on the House side have put forward does both of those, responsible spending and solves the debt limit crisis.
It raises the debt limit and it addresses the deficit.
Thank you.
Senator Merkley.
I yield back.
Oh, for the record, since I sit on the Finance Committee also, and since I sit on the Environment and Public Works Committee, let me just note that the tax credit provisions in the IRA came through the Finance Committee, were publicly debated in the Finance Committee, were voted on in the Finance Committee, and the methane program came out of the Environment and Public Works Committee based on my methane fee, which was also a matter of a lot of conversation in the Environment Public Works Committee.
So we want to have that debate as well today?
No, just correcting the record that there was, in fact, a lot of committee public action on the measures that ended up in the IRA.
When did we get the bill?
Senator Merkley.
When did we get the bill from the time we got it till we voted? How much time passed?
The provisions were clear well before and were subject
Was
to
it minutes
hearing
or
and
seconds?
debate. Hearing and debate months before.
Thank you very much. Senator Marshall.
All right, thank you, Madam Chairman, and welcome, Undersecretary. It's great to have you back in front of us. Congratulations on your nomination to be Deputy Secretary. We've literally asked some of our producers back home, what questions do you want us to ask you? So these are from my producers. Basically, as Deputy Secretary, you'll be the COO of the USDA. And we've heard from our stakeholders who are concerned about USDA's ability to timely deliver assistance and service to farmers. How do you plan to staff up and ensure USDA remains customer service oriented?
This is a crucial question, and it takes a lot of components, and it's something I'm eager to dive into. A key part of it is making sure that our team has the training and the tools that they need to deliver services timely, that they have the training when it comes to customer service, so they're responding at appropriate amounts of time. Also, there's good communication across the team, so that if someone in the field has a question about how a program is administered, they've got a clear connection to be able to speak to somebody in the national office. And that's a key reason why we established the State Office of Operations, to be able to facilitate that dialogue better. It's also about making sure they have the tools that they need to do the job. So having updated technology systems where it's not, you don't have to open 6 different programs to enter in one thing. And then it's about making sure that we're finding ways to simplify our processes, whether it's how do we get an environmental report that's a little bit, or an engineering report that's a little bit simpler, or that we're removing match requirements so that folks can better qualify for our programs.
Okay, thank you for the answer. The second part of the question is one you and I have talked about several times, and agriculture is not a job that's accomplished well from home. Our farmers and ranchers have to go out and work in the elements every day. They show up and they work literally sun up to sundown. I remain concerned that not just in the USDA, but so many of our departments in Capitol Hill, people are working from home still. An old saying, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. I'm not looking for you to tell me how many people traditionally have worked from home or they're on the road. Are people at USDA back to work in the office yet? How do you measure that? And what is your goal? What do you think it should look like?
I really appreciate you continuing to have this conversation with me, because I agree with you that physical presence in the office matters. It matters that somebody can walk up to a field office and there's somebody there to open the door and talk to them about their challenges. I agree with you that sometimes it's easier for me to walk across the hall and ask a question rather than having to dial them up on Teams. And I've also learned that flexibility is important too. We talked earlier about the challenges of recruiting people, with 38% of our workforce eligible to retire in the next 5 years. One of the first folks I met in Minnesota who had just been hired during COVID, so he was really eager to interact with that arty culture, and he showed up in person at our meeting because he wanted to meet me in person. But he was also asking to meet me in person because he wanted to see if it was at all possible to get a printer at his home, because sometimes it made more sense for him to print out the documents that still have to be filed by paper and go directly to a client rather than having to commute to the office first.
Right.
That flexibility is crucial for being able to recruit and retain.
I respect that, but we signed up for these jobs. I signed up to be a physician. I didn't have the choice of working from home. When people signed up to work for the government, no one said they could work from home. So I don't know. I think that we would be much better served to have our employees back to work. But appreciate your answer. Second question is about the technology you mentioned and just the application process. Senator Bozeman was in Kansas recently with me. Over and over, we heard from farmers, we have to hire an accountant to fill out this application form. They become overly complicated. I was working with my son just yesterday on his application for scholarships and school, and there's one form that works for every university. So our office is trying to streamline a uniform type of application process, streamline this. Are you committed to working with us and giving us the technical language to get the job done right?
I really appreciate your interest in this. I think there's a lot of work to do, and online applications are crucial. It's something that we're working on in the housing space. We've also worked on it for the Rural Energy for America program. When it comes to one application for all programs, it can get quite complicated. So, for example, combining our WEP programs for water and wastewater with SRF funds, because each state delivers the SRF funds, it's really hard to create an application that would work for everything. So I recognize there would need to be some really good conversations to figure out what's possible, and would love to have those conversations with you.
Madam Chair, could I have one more question?
Yes, you may.
I'm over my time limit here. My producers back home feel like USDA is not fighting on their behalf when it comes to science. And many of our environmental precision agriculture practices are being shunned by the EPA. We feel like the EPA is not respecting the USDA scientists, especially when it comes to pesticides. We feel like the EPA is ignoring USDA suggestions for atrazine mitigation practices. ESPA has ignored USDA suggestions for 11 safe uses of chlorpyrifos. And the DOJ sent a single email at a late time regarding the Ninth Circuit re-emption case. Will you be our fighter? Will you be there fighting to represent agriculture, my producers, when it comes to working with the EPA and other departments at the White House?
If confirmed as Deputy Secretary, the fundamental part of my job is the interagency collaboration. And part of that from USDA is making sure that I'm listening to farmers and ranchers and rural communities and also communicating our expertise at USDA to our sister agencies.
Well, thank you so much. We look forward to supporting your nomination, and we know you'll do a great job. And let's look forward to continuing the relationship and working together. Thank you. Department of Homeland Security's Public Charge Inadmissibility Rule. Last week, I had the honor of leading a trip with several of my fellow senators to Brownsville, Texas, to see the border crisis up front and firsthand for myself. The border crisis created by Joe Biden as Title 42 was coming to an end. We met a lot of people on the trip, and I want to share some of their thoughts, some of their concerns. We met a young former Marine officer who said he felt safer in Afghanistan than he did in southern Texas right now. Local residents were bracing for the impact with 170,000 people just across the border waiting to come across with the end of Title 42. Families were gearing up to protect their families against the cartels very specifically. We met a fifth-generation rancher who was leaving his family ranch and moving his family into town. And even that night, he was teaching his wife how to load a 410 gauge shotgun to protect their family. We met officers. Many of these officers were multi-generational. Their fathers, their grandparents had served on the border, and they said it was worse than they've ever seen in their lifetime. Something new on this trip, we were told that 90 Chinese military-aged nationalists are entering illegally every day in South Texas. As we all know, over 6 million people have entered the country illegally since President Biden took office. 6 million people. That's twice the size of my home state of Kansas. Another 1.5 million people have evaded apprehension and entered the country, gotaways, as they call them on the border. Thousands upon thousands more continue to overwhelm our borders. I think we all realize our immigration system is broken, but rather than fix the problem, this administration continues to point fingers and find ways to ignore or abuse our laws to provide pathways for illegal immigrants to come here. Many of the people crossing our border will get to roam freely throughout our country. They leave our intake facilities with a cell phone and a court date that's 4 to 5 years from the date they entered. I think we're all kidding ourselves if we think these folks will ever show up for those dates in 5 years. Now, despite breaking our laws, they will be long gone, settled into communities across the country. In fact, on our trip, law enforcement officers told me 90% of the migrants are not showing up for these court dates so far. Sure, they're going to seek citizenship down the road. There's no doubt about that. And open border colleagues across the aisle will no doubt call for amnesty for all of them. We expect President Biden will support that. He's said that as much himself, broadcasting across the globe that you can take advantage of the benefits we provide despite breaking our laws. Now, I think it's fair to say that Americans have the most generous legal immigration standards in the world. But we have to draw a line somewhere. Since the 1800s, our nation has required foreign nationals seeking admissions to the United States to show that they can take care of it for themselves without becoming a public charge or burdening the taxpayers. Most nations require you to have a job before you come into their country. We just don't want you to become a public charge if you want to become a permanent citizen. Being a public charge is a ground of inadmissibility under our immigration laws. Let me say that again. Being a public charge is a ground of inadmissibility under our immigration laws. Congress specifically directed the executive branch to consider various factors when allowing people into this great nation. These factors include age, health, family status, assets, resources, and financial status, along with education and skills. Indeed, as recently as 1996, Congress clearly declared in a policy statement included in the Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Reconciliation Act of 1996 that self-sufficiency is a basic principle of the United States immigration law and should continue to be a governing principle in the United States. Specifically, the Immigration and Nationality Act makes an alien who is an applicant for a visa, admission, or adjustment of status inadmissible if he or she is likely at a time to become a public charge. The public charge ground of inadmissibility therefore applies to aliens applying for a visa to come to the United States temporarily or permanently for admission or to adjust their status to that of a lawful permanent resident, with some limited exceptions. We need an immigration system that welcomes the best and the brightest, but we need to limit the cycle of chain migration. Again, we need some type of guardrails. While we open our hearts to asylum seekers, we must also build a merit-based immigration system that considers an immigrant's potential contributions to our economy, to our communities, and our future. We don't want a system that rewards idleness and reliance on taxpayer-funded benefits. Under the previous administration, the Department of Homeland Security issued a rule that would have required immigrants seeking to remain in the country to be self-sufficient. But under President Biden, the regulations have changed. Now, my hope is to override the Biden public charge rule today with a vote here in the Senate. The Biden administration's public charge rule makes a mockery of the law and the intent of Congress to ensure that immigrants are self-sufficient. According to an estimate by the Federation of Americans for Immigration Reform, at the start of 2023, the net cost of illegal immigration for the United States at the federal, state, and local levels was at least $150 billion. Again, since the start of 2023, the cost to taxpayers, $150 billion. Now, this number is going to increase drastically if this rule stands. Our resolution of disapproval would rescind the Biden public charge rule and hopefully spur this administration to come to the table and craft a solution that will ensure the self-sufficiency of immigrants and protect American taxpayers. I encourage my colleagues to vote in support of this CRA of disapproval to introduce some sanity into our immigration system. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
You're recognized for your questions.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. Mr. Secretary, do DHS employees have your personal contact information? And how widespread do you believe the distribution of your personal contact information is to DHS personnel?
When you speak of personal information, do you mean outside of the work context?
Your personal contact information, your personal emails.
Senator, I do not distribute that to DHS personnel.
Aside from email and text messaging, do you use any other form of personal electronic communication, such as encrypted message applications that may have errantly received or transmitted communications relating to official DHS business?
Senator, I follow the rules scrupulously.
Is that a yes or a no?
Senator, I follow the rules scrupulously.
Okay. In April, in sworn testimony before this committee, you insisted, and I'll quote you, "If somebody errantly sends me an email, my personal email, that should have been sent to my work email. I forward it to my work email. That's what I do. I fulfill my responsibilities scrupulously, and I have 100% confidence in the integrity of the actions." Despite that, a FOIA lawsuit by Americans for Prosperity has uncovered hundreds of pages of records reflecting your personal use of personal email account and cell phone for official DHS business since you assumed the office of Secretary. We sent you a letter on July 13 asking for additional questions on your and your subordinates' adherence to this DHS policy. on the use of non-DHS emails, but thus far you've failed to respond to me. Will you commit to getting the answers to our letter?
I'll be happy to look at your inquiry and respond accordingly. What you just articulated is perfect evidence of the fact that I have followed the rules.
And that explains why there's hundreds of pages of records reflecting your personal email account and cell phone for official DHS business?
Senator, you misstate the facts.
I've repeatedly said, don't watch what this White House does. I've repeatedly said, don't watch what this White House says, watch what they do. In May, the Biden administration said when Title 42 ended that migrants would face tougher consequences, and I quote that, tougher consequences if they were caught crossing the border illegally. But just in the last border crossing numbers from this past week, the Biden administration's actions showed that Border Patrol released with no consequence 156,000 migrants into the U.S. in September alone. Mr. Secretary, what are the consequences your administration threatened? From where I stand, the only consequences I see of border crossings are the historic number of crossings and the consequences that the American people are less safe today than they were 3 years ago.
Senator, that is incorrect. Removal and return of individuals under Title 8 of the United States Code is one example of a consequence that we deliver. In fact, in fiscal year 2023, we removed or returned more than 620,000 individuals. Just recently, we announced that we negotiated an agreement with Venezuela for the first time.
So you sent back 10, maybe 200 people, but there's tens of thousands of them are still here. How do you explain the 156,000 migrants in September alone that were released without any consequences?
That is incorrect.
So you didn't release 156,000 migrants into the United States?
Senator, those individuals, when they are processed, they are placed in immigration enforcement proceedings. If they do not qualify for relief, they are subject to removal. If they qualify for relief under the laws that Congress has passed, then they have established a basis to stay in the United States.
What percentage are removed? What percentage have been through the process that are then removed? What percentage of these folks actually have had a hearing? How long is the wait for this hearing? How would you describe to the American people that would make them feel safer today, how you handle that process?
The wait for the hearing is a perfect example of how broken our immigration system is. And in fact, when I first entered federal government here in Washington, D.C., after 12 years serving in California as a federal prosecutor, I learned that the time in between encounter and the final adjudication of an immigration case in 2009 was more than 6 years. So this problem of a broken immigration system has lasted for more than 2 decades. I believe the system was last reformed in 1996, and we are long overdue for a fix.
Would a first safe country asylum policy make us more safe or less safe?
Senator, the issue of a safe third country agreement is a matter of negotiation with third countries.
That's not my question. Would it make us more safe or less safe if there was indeed one?
It is a complex question that cannot be distilled with a simple question and answer as you have posed.
2/3, maybe 70% of the people that are encountered at our borders go through an asylum process. What percentage would you estimate if there was a third country policy in effect, or a first safe country in effect? What percentage would that eliminate from ever even getting to our border?
I think that's a very difficult statistic to
Not a guess.
present.
I mean, you're the Secretary of Homeland Security. You don't have a guess how much of an impact that would make.
Oh, I'm not in the guessing business, but I will say this, that when you ask about a consequence in the absence of one, I think it would be important to ask the more than 1.2 million people in fiscal year 2023 who've been returned, removed, or expelled under the law.
Thank you. I yield back.
Great. Thank you, Senator Marshall. Senator Marshall, you're recognized for your questions.
Thank you so much. Mr. Secretary, approximately how many illegal aliens in this country or here on asylum have direct ties to Hamas, to Hezbollah, to the Islamic Jihad, or the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps of Iran?
Senator Marshall, let me assure you that the individuals that pose a risk to our national security are our highest enforcement priority. The safety and security of the American public.
Do you have any idea
is
how many
our
numbers,
highest
what those
mission.
numbers are? Is it tens, is it hundreds, is it thousands?
An individual who poses a risk to our national security is our highest enforcement priority, and if
So
detention...
you don't know the answer to the question?
And if detention is indeed warranted by reason of the risk they present, then we indeed detain them.
Do you have an answer for my question?
I believe I have answered your question.
No, sir, you didn't. I asked you how many have direct ties to Hamas, Hezbollah, Islam Jihad.
Senator, if an individual is identified as having a nexus to one of those organizations, we would consider them a risk to our national security and take appropriate enforcement action to include, for
Thank you.
example, detention and removal.
Let's back up. Will DHS and when will DHS disclose the countries of origin of people arrested by Border Patrol on the terrorist watch list?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question, Senator?
Yep. Will DHS and when will DHS disclose the countries of origin of people arrested by Border Patrol on the terrorist watch list?
If you are referring, Senator, to the terrorist screening data set, just to be precise, I would be pleased to speak with you in the appropriate context. This would not be it.
How many gotaways did CBP record in fiscal year 2023?
I believe, Senator, that number is over 600,000, and as I'm sure you are well aware, the phenomenon of gotaways is something that has been a challenge for the Department of Homeland Security for decades. In fact, it is a powerful example of a broken immigration system.
Thank you. I want to talk about Chinese nationals for a second. Would you agree with me that over 18,000 Chinese nationals, many are military-aged young men, have illegally crossed the southern border in fiscal year 2023?
Senator, I don't have the precise number, but as I said, individuals who are encountered are placed into immigration enforcement proceedings, and if they qualify for asylum...
With all due respect, you would agree with me it's over 18,000, though?
I do not have the number at my disposal.
Do you know where the Chinese nationals are settling, where they're working, why they're here? How do you follow them?
Senator, if an individual has fled China and seeks asylum and qualifies for asylum, for example, if they fear persecution
I understand
by
that.
reason of their membership in a particular social group,
How do you follow them? That's
is-
not my question. How do you follow them? Do you have a heightened concern for these people?
so, Senator, if an individual poses a risk to public safety or national security, they are deemed a priority and can be placed in detention if the facts so warrant. If indeed we determine in the exercise of our law enforcement discretion that detention is not required because they do not present...
We understand, we all understand all that, Mr. Secretary, thank you. I want to go back to gotaways. I'm sure you'll agree with me that under Mr. Biden, that at least 1.7 million gotaways have evaded apprehension at our border. How many of these known gotaways have convictions in their prior country for rape or murder? How many of these known gotaways have been prosecuted and deported?
3 points, Senator. Number one, as I articulated earlier in this hearing, we are seeing a number of displaced individuals throughout our hemisphere that is unprecedented, number one. Number two, we are dealing with a broken immigration system. Number three...
But you're not going to answer my question.
Number three, if an individual...
How many of these known gotaways have committed crimes in the United States since you were sworn in?
Let me assure you that if an individual poses a risk to public safety pursuant to the enforcement guidelines...
But you have no ability to measure that?
Pursuant to the enforcement guidelines that I promulgated on September 30th of 2021, the individual is...
How many of these known gotaways are trafficking fentanyl?
The individual is an enforcement priority.
How many of these known gotaways are trafficking fentanyl?
Senator, we well know that the trafficking of fentanyl is not specific to a nationality. Tragically, we have individuals from various countries of origin. We have American citizens trafficking in fentanyl. Fentanyl is a scourge that we must all work together to overcome.
Okay, let's talk about the 169 individuals encountered on the terror watch list between the ports of entry in fiscal year 2023. How many were deported? How many are jailed? How many are still in the country?
Senator, with respect to the individuals on the terrorist screening data set, I would be pleased to provide you with the numbers in the appropriate context.
Of the over 75,000 special interest aliens who crossed our border illegally this fiscal year, what are their whereabouts? How are you tracking these people?
We have a number of ways of tracking them, Senator. If, in fact, they present a national security or public safety threat, we very well may detain them. If we do not believe that detention is appropriate, we have alternatives to detention. It's known by its acronym ATD, and we have various levels of supervision depending on the enforcement profile that the individual presents.
Okay. The folks back home, when they look at the evidence, they see that the DEA seized over 380 million doses of fentanyl in 2022. 73,000 Americans died from fentanyl poisoning in 2022, mostly young adults, school-aged children, and that 90% of the fentanyl comes from our southern border. You know, considering that just last month, our Border Patrol had almost 270,000 encounters, including 75,000 special interest aliens. Do Americans feel they're more safe today or less safe today under the policies of this administration?
Senator, we are taking it to the cartels, to the traffickers of fentanyl in an unprecedented way, with more resources and more efficient and productive operations than ever before.
But you would agree with me that Americans feel less safe today than they did before the start of this administration, and your testimony has only solidified the view that American people, that they don't have confidence in the job that you're doing. This is why I believe the defining issue in this next election is going to be exactly this. Are our families safer today than they were 3 years ago? Thank you. I yield back. Madam President.
Senator from Kansas.
Madam President. Border, border, border. I just had lunch with Speaker Mike Johnson, a great friend, a classmate. We came in together, and that's what he said. He said he wished we could get us all a t-shirt that said border, border, border. In my office this week, no matter what the question is, the answer is secure the border. In fact, I think Speaker Johnson's been talking to some of the same people I've been talking to. I had the great time of my life this past 7-10 days back home in Kansas. I got to spend time with my grandchildren, teaching them how to hunt and fish and sled in a very welcome 10-inch snow. I got to see a lot of friends and family members and share what's going on in their lives and get caught up. But no matter where I went, the number one worry people have is about the concern of the safety and security of their own family. In Kansas, the heartland, the middle of the country, the middle state, people are concerned about their own safety and security, and why wouldn't they be? Since Joe Biden was sworn into office, over 10 million immigrants have come into our border, and over 1.5 million gotaways have occurred. 10 million people crossing our border illegally, 1.5 million gotaways. This crisis at our nation's border is the number one most immediate threat to our safety and security. This is a true, clear, and present danger to our nation. Just think about these numbers. Fentanyl is now the number one killer of young adults in America. It kills a Kansan every day. Nearly 300 young Americans are dying every day from fentanyl poisoning. Not to mention what's going on with human trafficking, the growth of the cartel, and the violence, as my dad, the police officers, taught me, as the violence always follows the drug trafficking. But it seems like these numbers are falling on deaf ears at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Just look at September, October, November. These look like they're all going to be record-setting months for the number of people crossing our border illegally in these months. But yet, for some unknown reason, the White House wants to take border security off the table in the supplemental bill. Why? That's what people are asking me back home. Why? That's the question Americans want to know. They point out the facts that we know well up here. Under this administration, we've seen 279 known terrorists try to cross our borders, more than 24,000 Chinese nationals, not to mention some 80,000 aliens of interest from countries like Afghanistan, Iran, Iraq, and Syria who have breached our borders. This is indeed an invasion at our border, and every American is now paying for it. As a matter of fact, it's now costing Americans nearly $500 billion a year. Let me say that again, $500 billion a year to house and take care of these illegal immigrants. Can you imagine how many Border Patrol officers, how much technology, how many drug dogs, and yes, how much fence could we build for $500 billion a year? Again, that's what Americans are asking me back home. It's time for this chamber to step up to the plate and do what is right for the American people. For such a time as this, we need leadership. And I'm grateful, I'm proud, and the American people are glad to hear the leadership on this side of the aisle are saying we will deny cloture on this supplemental bill if there's not meaningful border security. This concept of a supplemental bill without taking care of our national security, of sending over $100 billion to foreign lands without addressing our own national sovereignty, well, it actually reminds me of what Abraham Lincoln once said. You can fool all the people some of the time, and some of the people all the time, but you cannot fool all the people all the time. Let my message today be clear. Let's bring on the hard work, late nights, weekends. That's what Kansans do. We work hard. We have those values of a hard work ethic, and I'm certainly willing to do just that, to work hard to get to border security. Look, on this side of the aisle, we're not going to waver. We're not going to quit. This is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to secure our border and to get this right for once. And I urge every Republican to vote down cloture of this outrageous supplemental package unless we see true, meaningful border security included. Now, we've got solutions that this body can send to the President's desk today that wouldn't cost a dime. Changing the asylum policy alone could result in as many as 75% less people entering our nation illegally. 75%. If we just turn off the siren of asylum, we can cut back on those crossing our border some 75%. That would free up the Border Patrol officers to do their job that they were hired to do, catching the bad guys, stopping the fentanyl, stopping the human trafficking, rather than playing nursemaid to nearly 10,000 illegal people every day. And also from a policy standpoint, we have to limit the President's abuse of his parole powers, which has enabled over 1.5 million immigrant parolees to enter our nation under his watch. Our insistence that these measures be included in the supplemental bill are not partisan. They're not hard-right distractions, as has been alleged, but it's an attempt to protect the lives and well-being of the Americans that elected us and our families, and to assure the sovereignty of this great nation. This is a national security issue, not an immigration issue. It's imperative, it's a must that any supplemental bill includes provisions to address these border issues. Any package agreed upon by all or some of the Senate Republican conference must actually be effective at controlling our borders. A measure that is advertised as stopping the torrent of illegal migration, but is not in practice, would be a devastating blow to the credibility of Republican senators on this issue over the long term, and unacceptable to the people we represent. This is why I urge every Republican in this body to vote no on cloture on any bill that does not, at a minimum, include policy changes that meaningfully address the flood of illegal immigration at our southern border. Thank you, Madam President. I yield back.